2023 is over, which means it's time for all the traditional year-end videos, like your favorite books of the year, your least favorite books of the year, everything I read this year. And let's start with one of my favorite videos to make, which is talking about my top books of the year. Hello, book friends. Welcome back to the channel. It's Alyssa. Hello if you're new. I had a fairly decent reading year in 2023. I read over 200 books, and I always find it difficult to make some very narrow top 10, top 5 best books of video, but it is one of my favorites because I love going back through my book list and seeing everything I read and reminiscing about how much I loved each book. So typically I take one or two books from each month and make a list. And since it fit really nicely, I have 23 books from 2023 that were my favorites. Now, there are definitely others that could have made the list, but these are the ones that really stood out for me at this time. I feel like these lists always change as time goes on and books seem to pull themselves to the forefront. But yeah, today, these are the 23 best books I read in 2023. I'm going to try to go through this rather quickly. Some of these I've talked about in various areas, so I don't know if I need to spend a ton of time on them. But we'll go right off the top with Boulder by Eva Balthazar. This is translated from Catalan, I believe, and I love this book. It is slim. It is got one of my favorite things, which is very sparse writing that is just perfection. I love this portrayal of sort of an obsessive but doomed relationship, this discussion of motherhood and those who want to be mothers and those who don't. I thought this was phenomenal. We did read this for TBR Lowdown, so there are, in-depth more discussions and reviews of this on TBR Lowdown, but that's all I'm going to say about it here. So good, please read it. I need to read Permafrost and the third one that's coming out, I think this year, or it's out now. It's new. Now, I've done different iterations of this favorite books of the year now for different things. I will be on a World Toppers video where a bunch of us talk about our favorite books. I have an episode for TBR Lowdown, and of course we have this video, so there are some overlaps, and one of the ones that I just made sure that I had to talk about over and over and over and over and over and over and over again is Under the Earth and Over the Sky by Emily McCosh, and I'm fairly certain I have a review for this on the channel. This is a self-pubbed fantasy about a fae king who finds a human boy in the woods. He's supposed to give him back to the humans, but he kind of just falls in love with him. He doesn't, things happen. And so there's building this family, there's dealing with trauma and past things in the past and resolving issues from the past. There's this thing that's seeping into the world to threaten magic and existence, and so there are stakes, but it is also very cozy and lyrical, and I love this book so much. Also, the art is all done by the author, who's also a graphic designer, so it is just a stunning book all around, visually, the writing. I love it. I will stand by, if you liked Strange the Dreamer for the lyrical writing, I think you'll enjoy this. There's a lot of Laini Taylor screaming through, in my opinion. My Phantoms by Gwendolyn Riley. I feel like I've brought this up a couple times. It might be on TBR Lowdown's best books to read that are under 200 pages. Maybe, I'm not sure. I know I've talked about it in some TBR Lowdown episodes. This is my first Gwendolyn Riley. I have First Love as well, which I haven't gotten to, but this is a look at particularly the relationship between mother and daughter, but I really feel like there's also a lot going on between daughter and father. It's just a really interesting book about those parental relationships. Very much liked it. The voice in it is great. It's got a little bit of darker kind of humor. Loved it. A book that I am sad wasn't on the Booker long list, and I really think it's because it came out way too early in 2023, but that's The New Life by Tom Crew. I absolutely adored this book. I feel like it got a lot of buzz right in the beginning of the year, and then it kind of got buried under a bunch of other new releases. But this is set in Victorian London. It's about two different men and their marriages and their homosexuality and how being homosexual at this time, how it is, and one man's striving to change things and get more acceptance as a gay man in Victorian society. It's so good. I loved the letters between these two men. I loved the way their relationships were. Some things were so heartbreaking and other things were just fascinating. And I really thought this was a brilliant debut. I really do feel like it just came out too early for Booker, and so many other things just kind of piled on top of it, and all the buzz kind of ended up dying by the time it became Booker time. But I love this book. I think this is so good. Another Booker book that I read this year that isn't from 2023's Booker, but from the previous year's Booker, is Maps of Our Spectacular Body by Maddie Mortimer. And I loved this book. I think about it often. It is about a mother with cancer and her daughter and their relationship. And it is also narrated in sections by the cancer inside this woman's body. It plays with form. It is beautiful. And I did not realize while I was reading it that Maddie Mortimer was like super young when she wrote this. So it is a phenomenal read. I see why it was longlisted for a Booker Prize, and I highly encourage you to read it. I think it's phenomenal. Another book we've talked about a lot this year is My Pen is the Wing of a Bird. This is a collection of short stories from Afghanistan. They're all written by Afghani women, and they are amazing. It is such an amazing collection of stories. Such an insight into a world that we don't often get to see outside of our American propaganda. I also love the story behind the creation of this collection and what happened as it was coming to fruition inside of Afghanistan. I encourage you to look at the discussion we had for TBR Lowdown on this one, because this was a TBR Lowdown book. So we do have a live where we talked about it, and we do break down a little bit of the background of what happened while this book was being created. And it's really fascinating. Part of the reason why I love books, and in particular translated lit, is that it allows you a window into worlds that are not your own. And this book, this collection, is a really phenomenal example of that. Yeah. Check out our discussion if you want more. I think if you're looking for a short story collection, check these out. I love them. Next up, I have Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. I feel like this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Tell Me I'm Worthless was one of those books where I kind of knew I was gonna like it, and I was really wanting to read it and wanting to read it and wanting to read it. And I finally got my hands on it. And when I finally read it, I was floored, like absolutely floored by how amazing this book is. I have a review on the channel, so I'm not going to go too much in depth on this, but essentially it's like it's set up like a haunted house narrative. The haunted house in the story is a stand-in for the UK and what's going on in like gender politics, trans politics, queer politics in the UK, and the rise of sort of fascist groups, right-wing groups all across Europe and obviously in the US. But this is particularly centered on the UK. And it's about kind of like a breakup and a thing that happens between a couple people. One of them are, something happens between the two main characters, and it happens in this haunted house. And that sort of sets the tone for this entire story. And you get both sides. You get our trans main character, and you also get the TERF other main character, and you get to see both of their perspectives as this story unfolds. It is very compelling. It is so page-turny. I loved this. I just need more. Alison Rumfitt is an automatic favorite. Brainworms was really good, but it's not going to make my top 23 this year, simply because Tell Me I'm Worthless is like leagues above it. If you're looking for a horror that has a lot of really great commentary on the political landscape of our time right now in terms of gender and sexual politics, I think that Tell Me I'm Worthless should be very high up on your list. Next up is another short book. I think it was in our 200 books, or not 200 books, our favorite books sort of under 200 pages episode as well for TBR Lowdown, but that's Ice by Anna Coven. I was floored by this book. I think I got this sort of as a recommendation from watching maybe Anna Novella's, one of her videos. and I picked it up, and the prose in this, the writing, it's just so amazing. It's beautiful, and it's like choppy and surreal, and the setting is just so like prescient, but also, oh, I loved this book. And I think about it often, and I do require a reread. And that may happen this year. But, you know, like you're in this frozen apocalyptic landscape in sort of like a World War II, post World War II Europe. There is climate kind of discussion as these ice sheets are rolling in and just making the world more uninhabitable. There's a young girl, it's called the Glass Girl, that our narrator is obsessed with, and she is hooked up with like this other character, and it's really this discussion of violence and trauma, and it's so good. It's just such a beautiful book. It's got warnings about climate change, warnings about totalitarianism. It discusses like violence against women's bodies, sort of like mental healthy kind of things. Tangentially, it is like a fever dream at times, and just the writing itself is so astonishingly good. Astonishingly good. I need more Anna Kavan in my life, and I'm going to have to search out more because it was just such a shockingly good book. Next is a book that should come as no surprise because I talk about it anywhere I can, and that is Mayfly by CJ Lead. This book was such a surprise, but not a surprise, smash for me. When I got the brief from Tor, I was like, I need this book, and we need to interview her for TBR Lowdown, because this just sounds like the perfect blend of horror and female rage and humor, and that's what you got. And it unlocked this other like subgenre of horror that I didn't know existed and that I might be into, and that is this idea of horror romance, or horror with romantical like plot lines. It really does have these elements of like your standard uh, romance novel, but make it sick and twisted and don't give you an ending that you expect. I love it. Maeve is coming back for more, and that makes me even more happy. And I can't wait. I cannot wait. This book is so good. The cover is stunning. CJ Lead is just a lovely human being, and so good. Can't wait to see what else she has. My next is Stoner by John Williams, which should also be no surprise. There's a full review of this on the channel, so you can go there. There's some lovely discussions in the comments as well about the book. I've talked about it a bunch. But this is one of those really quiet books that digs its way into your brain, and you never quite forget it, even though at it is quite mundane. It's just the story of a guy who is living his life from like the early 1900s till whenever he dies, and that's it. That's really just, it's his life. It's his life, his marriage, his job, working in this university in what is basically like middle America, and it's so mundane and everyman, but it's so, I don't want to say perfect, because this is also often touted as the perfect American novel or the perfect novel, and I don't really know what a perfect novel is, but the writing is this very well done blend of simple and like kind of just brilliant at the same time. It really does stick with you, and I need to read more John Williams. I do have Butcher's Crossing. I think that keeps coming on my Libby holds, and I keep kicking it back because I'm just not quite ready to sit down with it, but I will sit down with it properly this year and read it, because I need to know what else he writes. I heard they're very different, but I can imagine they're both incredibly good. Another book that has a review on this channel is A Little Luck by Claudia Pinheiro. This is the second book that Charco Press has put out that is translated from her into English. And this is very different from Elena Knows, but I still love this. This story was phenomenal. It's about a woman who has to go back from Boston to Buenos Aires to deal with something related to her job. And that makes her also have to confront a lot of things from her past. And the storytelling is just like perfect. It is just got this very hypnotic and addictive way of slowly like rolling out pieces of the story to keep you reading and reading and reading. And then there's drama, there's horrific moments, there's very poignant moments. I love it. It's so good. Please, if you haven't read this yet, please read it. There is a full review on the channel, but please read it. This was a surprise. Daughters of Smoke and Fire by Ava Homa. This is a a story written by a Kurdish woman, and it's a story about being Kurdish, and it is a story about the struggle of being a woman. So it follows Layla, who is a Kurdish woman living in Tehran, and her struggle for freedom, her struggle to hold on to her culture and her people. And it's so hard to read, but so brilliantly done. You see what happens to her brother, you see what happens to her dad, you see what happens to her mother, you see how having your land stolen and having your people kind of integrated and nearly erased in a lot of ways, or at least suppressed, um, how that affects people. And it's a brilliant book. It needs to be read by more people. It did come out a couple years ago and I haven't heard a lot about it, but I loved this. It came in an unplugged book box and I just picked it up to read because I was like, oh, I have, I'll do this. This looks good. And I was shook by how good it was. I will read you this little blurb about it. Daughters of Smoke and Fire is an evocative portrait of the lives and stakes faced by 40 million stateless Kurds, and a powerful story that brilliantly illuminates the meaning of identity and the complex bonds of family, perfect for fans of The Kite Runner and Half of a Yellow Sun. I would definitely pick this up. I think this is phenomenal and kind of slept on. I think it's absolutely criminal that this next book wasn't nominated for or longlisted for the Booker this year, and that is Wandering Souls by Cecily Pinn. This is such a phenomenal story. The narrator of the story is very interesting. I love this so much. So this is the story of Vietnamese immigrants attempting to get to the US, I believe they're trying to get to, but they end up in the UK. And it is interjected with different other stories of immigrants and violence against the Vietnamese people, and women, and how to survive as a refugee, and what happens to many refugees that don't make it to wherever they were meaning to get to. And it is so good. It is such a good book. It is a short book, but it's powerful, and I love the writing style. And when you finally find out who the author is, who the main narrator of the story is, some of the voice of it makes sense. And I love this. It is honestly criminal that this was not longlisted for the Booker this year, in my humble opinion. This book was phenomenal. It deserves more praise, and so I'm going to give it some in my little year-end wrap-up. Next up, we actually have one of the books I read to take a break from the Booker, and that is The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is the story of a young girl who is just kind of like living her life in Ireland, and she gets herself into some trouble. She's one of those kind of immature grown-ups. There's also a bit of second chance romance in this. There is an affair that goes on. There's a very codependent relationship that she has with her best gay friend that she kind of has to grow out of. And it's just a refreshing kind of contemporary commercial book that I actually really, I love this. And sometimes you just need these nice little palate cleansers to get you through reading all of the Booker books in 6 weeks. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. And if you're just looking for like a nice read that's got like just enough meat to keep you going, but isn't like too literary or too like political or too anything, it's like just enough of everything to give you just a little bit more substance than your average fluff book. I love this. This was good. This was a good time. Next is a book that I do not shut up about, and that is Monsters: A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. This, if I had to like pick one favorite book for the year, I don't think I could, but this would 100% be like a very strong contender for the best book of the year, because I think about this all the time. I talk about it all the time. I recommend it all the time. Claire Dederer is a movie critic, and so the book is a collection, a couple of essays, and the main point is to talk about what happens when kind of your idols or the creators that you find out that they have done bad things. She's specifically sort of talking about like a Woody Allen or a Roman Polanski, but we can relate that to writers and other creatives and other people. What happens when you find out that the person who made the thing that you love isn't the most upstanding of people. I think this is one of the best arguments that I've read or seen or heard discussing this whole separating the art from the artist thing that we all like to talk about all the time. He does such a great job of highlighting the nuance that is in this, and kind of showing why we're probably never going to come to any consensus as a group over whether or not you can, or how can you, or when can you, or anything like that, because it ends up being such a deeply personal and individual and specific to each monster um, thing. Love this. There's also a discussion about being a creative and being being a woman who's creating, and like being a mother, and how, and the role of wife and the job of wife, and how having a wife makes it easier to create, which is another theme that has come up a lot this year in my reading. And this is one of the best books that talks about that. So love this. Next up is this first in a trilogy for a new fantasy, sci-fi, fantasy. I think it's a fantasy. I don't know, it's hard. They classify it as both, but it's called Surviving the Sky. And this is from the Rages trilogy. This is the first. And I was kind of blown away by how much I liked this and how interesting this was. This is a fantasy that is talking about climate change, but is also one where your main characters are older, they're married, they are having more adult things. The world building is very interesting, and the sciencey kind of magic that goes into how this world exists and the things people can do are very interesting. And I'm just so excited to see where this goes. And I hope that it continues to deliver and deliver and deliver as you go through the trilogy. She is chunky. She's over 700 pages, so be warned. But I loved this. I saw it all over TikTok. Occasionally, TikTok doesn't do me wrong. And this was definitely worth the read. Loved this. I'm very curious to see what happens. Where we left off is very worrying. So I need to know. I need to know what happens next. I reread a bunch of books this year, and one of them was Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year. And the first time I read it, I think I just read it too quickly because I was trying to quickly consume these books to put out reviews in advance of the shortlist announcement. But I kind of knew I had to go back and reread it. So I pretty much like read it in September and then read it in October. And this is the kind of book that improves with every reread. Definitely 100%. It is a very simply told story that feels very sinister and dark. And it's talking about this woman being in this unnamed town and the way the villagers don't really accept her. But it also talks about being Jewish, but also being the child that does for the family. It talks about feeling like an outsider, being made an outsider, anti-Semitism, but all of that is so very quiet, and you can miss pieces very easily because of how the story is told and how simply and atmospherically it's told. I will probably have to read this again, and I will continue to have more and more appreciation for it. I think as I read it more and more often. I feel like this is going to become like a Mrs. Dalloway for me, where it just keeps burrowing into my brain, and I keep going back to it and going back to it and loving it more and more. We're coming up on the finish line, I swear. Next up is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. Again, I have this as a individual review, but I loved how weird this was, but also how frank this was as a discussion of being a caretaker of somebody who is ill, as a look at the grief you have before you lose somebody. I mean, grief doesn't start necessarily the moment you lose someone. There is sort of this pre-grief that happens when you have a loved one with a prolonged illness or is in the hospital for a length of time and is stuck in like ICU or something. It's also a discussion of caregiver fatigue, and I just loved it. I think that Melissa Broder is really great at weird books, but this one feels a bit of a departure. It's not just weird, it's very frank and personal, and I loved it. I think it's fantastic. I do think she's not great at ending stories. I'm still stuck on that, but overall, I think it was phenomenal. If you're looking for a book on like grief, and maybe if you're coping with your own caregiver fatigue, you might find some value in reading it as well, to not feel so alone or feeling like guilty about feeling so frustrated and annoyed and tired and anything that is not just like being altruistically caregiver, that kind of stuff. Next is Women Without Shame, which is a collection of poems from Sandra Cisneros. I've tried to say this with Jesus a couple times. I've practiced it and I don't think I got it right. But this is the author who wrote The House on Mango Street, which is a phenomenal book. And this is a collection of her poems. And some of these poems are just phenomenal. There's a longer poem near the end of the collection that is about it's basically about like all the men that she's had in her life. And it stems from somebody basically saying, "Oh, don't put me in a poem." And so she puts them all in poems, and it's funny. It's laugh out loud funny. And this collection is really wonderful. It is definitely poems about womanhood, and about being a Latina woman, but also about being a woman of a certain age, of being a woman who is older and her body is changed, but she is also sexual and independent and isolating and lively and flirtatious and all the things that you continue to be even when you are 40, 50, whatever. So I love this collection. If you want a nice collection of poetry, I think this is a really great one. Last four, like we're rounding in. We're almost there. Longborn by Jo Baker. This is a book that was recommended to me by one of you, and it is the story of Longborn, which is the house in Pride and Prejudice that the Bennets live in, and it is the story told of Pride and Prejudice told from the servants. It is brilliantly written. It provides a lot of context of the period. These characters live these really rich lives that you never get to see because they are basically to be seen and not heard. Upstairs always gets the voice and downstairs doesn't. And it really blends in nicely with the like canonical text of Pride and Prejudice. There's moments throughout where we get reminded kind of where we are in the story itself. But these servants in this house are just, I love them so much. And Mrs. Hill, Mrs. Hill broke my heart. Oh, you need to read it. It's so good. Next, I have As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. This is one of the more recent books I read. This has a review as well on the channel. This is a story about a woman who is a young woman trying to survive during the Syrian Revolution. She works at a hospital and she is dealing with PTSD and grief and just every day having to deal with intense trauma of death and bombings and having to decide if she's going to stay or if she's or seek refuge somewhere else. And then how can she do that? What does she need to do? Can she trust these people? It's, I think, a very brilliantly written book. I think it's incredibly poignant and I loved it. I know that a lot of people might not connect with it as much, at least my viewers, because it is YA, but I often forgot that it was YA because these characters are dealing with such heavy things that I forgot they were YA. And I think that's also a really important part of this text is that things like this force people to grow up and force people to cope and force people to do certain things so that they can survive in a hellscape. Yeah, very important read. Love this. Cannot recommend it enough. Next up is a book that I read that the publisher sent me, but I read it because Jess Owens read A Sad Girl Lit and loved it. And I was like, you know what? I need to see what my friend is reading that she liked. And she had asked me if I read it. And I said, no, I haven't read it yet. And so then I finally picked it up and I read it. It's one of my last books I read this year. And that was Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. And I love this book. This book is for everybody who has ever been going to work and felt like they were walking to the guillotine because they just cannot do this another day on this rat race of hell. This is late stage capitalism has ground you down into just a pile of dust. And how do you cope with that mentally? Our main character has a seemingly phenomenal job in Silicon Valley. Her company is basically a cult where the two leaders of it, it's just everybody is just so excited to be working there. And isn't it such a privilege to be there? And shouldn't we all be grateful that we have jobs here, because there's a long line of people that are going to take you out. And in this instance, there really are people who would take your spot in a second. So there's this fear of like no security. You're constantly kind of being screwed over by your employer because you should just be happy that you have a job. Like, why do you need to be compensated appropriately? She's also dealing with a lot of things in her own personal life as well. And the ending is very dark and very sad. And I really wanted to know, if you've read this book, what do you think happened at the end? How do you read that ending? It's just open enough that I feel like you could go different ways on it. But I really like this. I think it really touches on a feeling that a lot of people are having right now, especially like post-pandemic. The world is that we're in it right now, that we're in right now. How just kind of ground down people are. Just people just don't want to work like this anymore. And I know people often like to comment how like nobody wants to work anymore, and it's not that people don't want to work, it's that the conditions that people are working in, people don't want to stand for it anymore. It's not enough. It's not healthy. It's not what people want. And there is this push, hopefully, that will come for change. But in the meantime, people are just kind of getting ground down by it. And I think this book really captures that feeling really well. It also has a stunning cover. And then finally is the last Patreon pick that we read this year, and that was Lives of the Wives. And I love this book. I love this voyeuristic look into the lives of literary marriages. I also loved being introduced to stories and authors that I didn't really know much about. Like, I might know their names, but I don't know a lot about their books. And it caused me to at least pick up one new book. So before the end of the year, before my low buy, no buy kicked in, I did pick up Elizabeth Jane Howard's The Long View, because I need to know how the story reads. It is about a marriage and a divorce, and you kind of start at the divorce and you go backwards and find out about this couple, I guess, from the beginning. And it just sounded like really interesting. It sounded like something that I would really connect with, and excited and so happy that I found out about this book through reading this other book, which is one of my favorite things that happens sometimes when you find other things through reading other books. But I love this look at literary marriages. I love this look at what it means to, again, this is a theme that came up a lot this year, the job of wife. What does being a wife mean? And how does having a wife allow the other person in that relationship to achieve success that maybe the wife can't achieve because they're so busy running the household or taking care of the kids or like managing your emotions or whatever is needed in the relationship. So I love these. I also loved the final chapter with Roald Dahl because I didn't really know all that much about Roald Dahl other than like I loved Matilda as a kid, but he's a real jerk. So anyway, love this. I would love more books on literary marriages. I think they're very fascinating. I like just peeking in the window and being a little gossip queen. So those are the 23 books I have pulled out as favorites from 2023. If you have read any of these, if you have even made it this far in this video, please let me know at least one of your favorite books from 2023. If I haven't read it, I might go seek it out and see if it's something that I would like to. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this up because the next video I have to film is my rapid fire every book I've read in 2023, and there are a lot of them, and I'm going to be very tired, and I'm nursing a migraine, but I got to get this done because it's daylight out. I'm awake during the day. Got this far, like leave a comment, say hello, do something. Just let me know that you've made it this far because this video is going to be long. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video, whatever it may be, because it's my channel and I can do whatever I want. Bye.
So just sit with me, talking to the night until the morning, building chemistry. I don't think I ever wanna go come closer next to me, trying to find another way to say this, but I think